it was conducting a variety of experiments. So was the military. There's a lot of speculation. This project is so unknown, and so many of the records were destroyed, that you can go off in a lot of directions. Who killed John Lennon? You know, why? What was Sirhan's story? Was he mind controlled? Ted Kaczynski is another one. In my books, I only deal with facts. My favorite chapter in all my books is the footnotes. Everything is footnoted. Everything comes from somewhere. So I don't deal with cases like those. I love reading about them. So I'm glad that other people do write about those. But in my books, I try to stick to the facts. And it's frustrating in writing about MKUltra because I'm painfully aware that I've only uncovered a small fraction of what MKUltra was and what Sidney Gottlieb did.
So there's no concrete evidence connecting to Ted Kaczynski or even Charles Manson or any of that stuff?
I haven't seen any evidence connecting MKUltra to Manson or to the Unabomber. Unfortunately, there's so much that's been lost. When Sidney Gottlieb left the CIA, he violated federal law by destroying all the records of MKUltra. He had the support of the Director of Central Intelligence, his boss, in doing this. As a result of that, there's huge gaps in what we know. And it's frustrating because I realize that in telling this story, I've only scratched the surface and told a small part of what MKUltra was and what Sidney Gottlieb did.
There was another guy, like a famous gangster hitman who was in prison, who was one of his victims as well.
This is actually an interesting story because that's one exception to the rule that we don't know anything about what happened. Whitey Bulger, the famous Boston gangster, was an MKUltra victim. And we don't need the records of MKUltra to find this out because he has written about it. So as a young thug in his 20s, Whitey Bulger was sent to the federal prison in Atlanta, Georgia. There was a doctor there named Pfeiffer, who was an MKUltra subcontractor. And Pfeiffer was sending back reports to the CIA, to Sidney Gottlieb, about how prisoners responded to LSD. One of the prisoners that he recruited was Whitey Bulger. He told those prisoners, we're researching a medication for a possible cure for schizophrenia. We need your help. It's a humanitarian project. They were not told anything about the real motivation for the project. So Whitey Bulger had terrible reactions. He writes in his diaries about having panic attacks that never left him for the rest of his life and how he was so psychologically destroyed by this. And given the amount of LSD that he was fed over a period of well over a year, it's quite understandable that he would have had serious psychic reactions. The footnote to this is that in the 1970s, so 20 years later, Whitey Bulger is now a gangster on a high level up in Boston, and he reads that there was such a thing as MKUltra. That's when the news first came out. And then he finds out from a paper in Atlanta that, yes, that nice Dr. Pfeiffer, who I was helping trying to find a cure for schizophrenia, was actually working for the CIA. And this was all part of a project that had nothing to do with schizophrenia. And they were just using me. He got so angry. He told his fellow gangsters, I'm going to go to Atlanta. I'm going to find that Pfeiffer and I'm going to kill him. He never did that, as far as we know, although Pfeiffer did die an early death, apparently not violent. But it shows you that that's just one example, Whitey Bulger, of somebody who had tremendous psychic disturbances, maybe lifelong, from being a victim of MKUltra. And you can only extrapolate from that one case how many others there must be.
He went on to murder tons of people after that, right?
Yeah. He did. And some lawyers in the Boston area were puzzled that this didn't come up in his trial. Maybe the defense lawyer should have gotten up and said that the reason he did it was that MKUltra gave him too much LSD and drove him crazy. Now, whether a jury would have bought that or not, I don't know. But the fact that Gottlieb, the CIA, and MKUltra overlap with this Boston gangster project just shows you the extremes to which MKUltra went.
And now I find it hard to believe that there's nothing like this going on today. There's no sort of crazy secret experiments that are going on today like this.
It would be naive to believe that such a secret project as was carried out in the 1950s would never be carried out today. Very few people would ever have believed that MKUltra existed if you had shown them what was happening while it was happening. Nobody would have believed. Doesn't that make it logical that there could be things going on right now that if you would find out about them are so extreme that nobody would believe them? When Gottlieb finally finished his MKUltra work after almost a decade, he concluded that mind control is a myth, that you cannot actually make somebody commit a murder if that person is fundamentally opposed to committing murder. You cannot do it. That's just made up. That's movies. He made that conclusion after wreaking horrific havoc and leaving a terrible bloody trail behind him. But I think he was probably right. And that was the overwhelming evidence, not only of everything that he had researched over 10 years, but everything that qualified psychologists had been telling him, but he just wouldn't listen to. However, if he was right that there's no such thing as mind control, maybe we can say that he was right given what was known at the time that he was saying this. That was more than 50 years ago. The advances in computer science, cyber technology, artificial intelligence have been so dramatic since then. We've gotten into regions that scientists like Sidney Gottlieb of the 1950s could not even imagine. Therefore, although I suspect that Gottlieb was right when he concluded that there's no such thing as mind control, it's not possible in the early 1960s, is it still true today? I'm not so sure. And it would surprise me to learn that no Secret Service is trying to answer this question right now as we speak.
So how did MKUltra ultimately dissolve? And what did he do after MKUltra was done with? Obviously, he destroyed the records, right?
MKUltra was not ended on a particular day. It faded away during the early 1960s. There were no new projects. The old projects were allowed to fade away. There were successor projects. None of them were nearly as intense. And I think the horrors at what was revealed about the CIA in the 1970s also led them to take quite a step back from this kind of research. But that's not to say they never stepped forward again. I really believe that there must be things going on now that are just as shocking as what I've discovered about MKUltra from back then. So MKUltra ended as a project on its own, but the idea behind it never really died. And I think in the modern age, the question of how you could try to control other people's minds in a battle situation or in a covert action situation must be intriguing some scientists who are working for secret services in the United States and elsewhere.
Well, I mean, it's weird in the sense that it's the same thing as, you know, making an excuse to do something immoral, making an excuse saying that, oh, this other country is possibly doing this, and, you know, being fearful of being destroyed by them or them coming up with this technology first and then being able to crush us.
It's the classic security dilemma in international relations. Countries take steps to defend themselves. Those steps then seem aggressive to the other country, which then takes aggressive moves that then starts to spiral up again.
Or just make up fake narratives.
Exactly. There's also a psychological concept called projection. You imagine what you would do, so you assume that the other guy is doing that too.
Right. The thief always thinks everyone's stealing from him.
When CIA prisoners were taken by the communists in the 1950s, we assumed that the communists were horribly torturing them and using them as subjects in grotesque experiments. They weren't. But since we were doing that, we assumed that that's what they must be doing. And in fact, That's why we had to do it, because they were, but actually it turned out that they weren't and we were.